Good morning to everyone out there on Facebook land joining us here. We're going to be looking at Mark chapter 7, verses 24 through 30. If you want to open up your scriptures there, class conversation is winding down here. We're going to begin soon. Mark 7, 24 through 30. All right. Welcome, everyone. We are at Mark chapter 7, verses 24 through 30. Got a few questions. You hopefully got the sheet available. Talking a little bit about some historical things that take place in this narrative. I'll read again the 6 verses. Jesus left that place and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, yet he could not keep his presence secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an evil spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was Greek, born in Syria and Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demons out of her daughter. First, let the children eat all they want, he told her, for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs. Yes, Lord, she replied, but even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. Then he told her, for such a reply you may go. The demon has left your daughter. She went home and found her child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. I want you now to compare that narrative to Matthew chapter 15, 21 through 28, and share with me a little bit of what you notice Matthew includes and Mark does not. Matthew 21, 28. What do you notice that Matthew puts in his narrative that Mark does not? Seven verses there. What are the disciples saying in Matthew? Send her away. Mark doesn't have that. Matthew does. Send her away. And he's got also in Matthew, I was only sent to the lost house of Israel, where Mark does not have that. Yet the gist of the story is still the same. Matthew has a little bit more detail. So when you look at the disciples in Matthew's account, they're asking to send the woman away. This is kind of 1E. How do you think the disciples wanted Jesus to send the woman away? With prayer granted or denied? Denied. Denied. Why do you conclude that the disciples just wanted her to be sent away with a denial of the request? She wasn't of the tribe of Israel. She was a Canaanite. I've been doing some reading about the distinction between the Gentiles and Canaanites, and some of the Midrash basically has the same kind of stuff that you can find in the Quran about anybody who was an unbeliever. The infidels. Canaanites were considered infidels as well, and they said that if you come across a Canaanite that's dying, don't help them. I mean, really, it was that strong. It's not in the Bible, but it was in their tradition that they had these boundaries very strongly set, that they were the chosen people and everyone else was not. And they kind of said this, that if you help an enemy and you help that enemy recover, what was their conclusion? The enemy will do what? Will come back and fight you. So what kind of view do they have towards human nature? What kind of view is that toward human nature? You help your enemy, and you help the enemy recover, and they argue that if you help your enemy recover, all you're doing is you're just increasing the amount of your enemies. So what view do they have on human nature? Positive or negative? Negative. Negative. What do you view in our culture today? Do we have a positive or a negative view of human nature? A lot of churches are going to go with the total depravity. They're going to look like, the Lutheran, the Reformed, the Presbyterians, we're all in the same boat, total depraved. We got a negative view. The question that's asked among the kids in confirmation is, what is original sin? Luther defines the answer of what original sin is: the total corruption of our human nature. So I always ask kids, okay, so when you say total corruption of human nature, How much is it? 50% or 100%? And they will understand that Luther is communicating it's 100%, that he doesn't have a very positive view. All right, so even we as Lutherans, and Luther's got this negative view on human nature, should that prevent us from helping people in need? No, no. I mean, we look at the situation, and I'm really torn about what's taking place on our border as a Christian. I know, as a citizen of America, I know the laws and the regulations and the rules. And I know a lot of people are down there, unfortunately, in that border that were caught in the middle of this coyote cartel, American immigration laws. And for one of them, maybe, I don't know, when I've been down there, you just kind of wonder how many of them are just innocent sufferers, and that we need to give them daily bread. We should do something, not make them cross the borders, but they're hungry, they need clothing. I mean, they're hurting. And we as Christians, we know the laws. We're supposed to admire the laws of our country. The fourth commandment is very true. At the same time, too, we have a responsibility to take care of our neighbor. What did Jesus use? What parable did Jesus use to explain our neighbor? The parable of the Good Samaritan. Samaritans and Jews, enemies or friends? Enemies. Who fell among robbers, Jews or a Samaritan? A Jew. Who was the one that helped the Jewish guy? Samaritan. That's what Jesus says. You know, the boundaries go away when you see a neighbor in need. You as a Christian need to just understand that anyone is in need, that's your neighbor. Do what you can within the boundaries of the law of the government, but understand if there is a person that's hurting, you need to take care of that individual. Not worry about whether or not you're helping a person become another enemy of yours, or, you know, how do you fit the law? We should be able to find a way to feed these people, clothe these people, take care of them, maybe, you know, find a way to get them back home. I don't know what the answer is, but I know that one thing, as a pastor, as a Christian, we should just not let them sit on the border and suffer. I would hope that you'll all agree with that, you know. Annette.
I feel like we saw that last month during the freeze. People were helping each other, their neighborhoods, regardless of any of the things that can divide us in other circumstances. No one cared what religion you were, if you even believed in God, what color you were, what your sexual orientation was. No one cared.
Right.
Help each other. We saw that a lot last month.
Yeah, and that's good. Now we just probably need to magnify that, huh? Yeah. And how does the Christian church respond? Somebody sent me a meme on Facebook, said, what do they mean by this? Somebody had put graffiti on the church, say, take care of the homeless or remove the tax status from the church. So what kind of statement is this individual saying when they spray painted the church with that phrase? Take care of the homeless or lose your tax exempt status.
It's our responsibility.
Yeah, and that's true, but is it only our sole responsibility or everyone's? It should be everyone's. It shouldn't necessarily single the church out. But they've got those that are anti-church are going to really make that statement any way that they can make the church look bad. You're not doing your job, so therefore if you're not doing your job, I'm going to support losing your tax exempt status and all your offerings will be taxed. Which is kind of odd. How do you understand why would you tax offerings? Have taxes already been paid on those dollars?
Yes.
So taxes on the offerings is a double tax. Yeah, property. Yeah, I mean, they could go property.
All the materials I improved my lot with.
Yeah, that's true. Property taxes would be something that we would no longer be exempt from. In the state of Texas, that could be costly. Yeah. So I just kind of keep that in your prayers as your pastor. Just, you know, maybe as a group. Last Sunday, we had the conversation, and action was taking place from the conversation we had last week. That was great to see. Maybe somebody, as we sit there and pray about this, can figure out something we can do in some way, shape, or form. You know, you remember the story about a whole bunch of starfish wiping up onto the shore, and one guy comes up and he starts throwing one after another. Have you heard that?
Yes.
Yeah, he starts throwing one in and another, and one person comes to, what are you doing? He said, trying to save the starfish. And she said, to him, look at all of them. There's, you can't get these all back in the ocean. How in the world can you make a difference? And he picked up the one and he says, I just made a difference for this one. You know, we may not be able to conquer the whole world, but can we maybe make a difference for one? And do what we can as a smallest group as we are. So getting back in, the disciples have got this boundary between the Canaanites and the Jews. The disciples have got that attitude, don't help that person in need. They're not our neighbor. And Jesus enters, of course, in a dialogue. The disciples are saying this because the woman is, how would you think, if you were to describe this woman and you were to be there at that scene, how would you describe this woman? How would you describe her?
Well, she evidently had heard what Jesus would do for her, whether she really believed in him or not.
Okay.
You know, she was asking for help.
What about her behavior?
She was very humble.
She was humble. What else?
Very desperate.
Very desperate. I'm still looking for the P word. Persistent. Persistent. And that's, out of those three, that's the reason why the disciples got aggravated. She's getting obnoxious. Have you ever had that with your children? She was getting obnoxious. Yeah. They keep asking and keep asking. So why the silence of Jesus? Why the silence of Jesus? Why didn't he offer her assistance or say, you know what, just go home, I'm not going to. Why the silence? He could have taken care of it either way immediately, but why the silence?
Well, just previously he had said he to the lost tribe of Israel.
Only after a while, but he was silent for a long time. He only started saying something when the disciples had enough. I can't take the noise anymore. Send her away. Then he engages in conversation. So why the silence? Now, there's no right or wrong answer here. Well, they're waiting on him, but what is Jesus showing to the disciples by keeping quiet about the woman? What is he showing that's admirable about the woman?
She doesn't give up.
She doesn't give up.
And she was willing to take the crumbs from the table.
She takes very things. She talks humility. She talks persistent. And both of these things are things Jesus wants to teach his disciples. You need to be persistent in prayer. And you need to be humble in prayer. And here this Canaanite is showing you both lessons, and you're not getting it. The one that comes from the enemy has got it better than you do. You're not getting it. Persistence and humility. And hopefully by his silence, the message was getting communicated through. Disciples had enough. They asked Jesus to say something. So why do you think, though, go back to 1a, why do you think Jesus heads to these pagan areas? Why does he go to Tyre and Sidon and to the non-Jewish areas? Why is he going there? Anyone want to gander or guess at that one?
Because I think he sees the big picture that he isn't going to just die for the Israelites.
Yeah, he's for everyone, but at this time he says he's only for the lost house of Israel. He's going there for rest and relaxation. Because the Gentile world's not going to really necessarily know much, and he needs rest. So he goes into the pagan areas just to get away from things. It's kind of his little vacation. The question is does Jesus need vacation?
And it's uniform.
You know, I think of this question, and as I was thinking of this as I was getting this class ready in my mind this morning, just a few minutes before I go live. Did Jesus need rest and relaxation 40 days in the temptation? Did Jesus need food and water for 40 days? Apparently not. Why, therefore, if Jesus doesn't need to serve his humanity in 40 days of temptation, why now? My thought is that God, in his wisdom, will allow Jesus to experience the human needs in order for Jesus to understand and experience humanity, the need for rest. If there was not a need for rest, like in the temptation, God would provide the humanity to stay strong. But here, God allows the humanity to tire and weaken, where the human being, the person of Christ, needs rest. Where in the world does God allow the humanity of Christ really to tire? On the cross. He could have kept that thing going forever, right? If he's God. Yeah. So that's the way of God's wisdom and timing, that if my son doesn't need, in my plan, his humanity taken care of, I will supply for that like I did in the temptation. But I want my son to experience tiredness, weakness. I want my son to experience death. So it's in the counsel and wisdom of God of why things are of the way they are. So why are there still Canaanites? You go to Judges 1:27 through 33. Someone look that up and read those 6 verses. Why are they still Canaanites? The Canaan was the promised land, and you almost get the idea that when the people of Israel get into the promised land, they were supposed to wipe out everybody that was there, especially the Canaanites. But in Judges 1:27 through 33, if somebody could read those 7 verses. Go ahead, Craig, nice and loud.
But Manasseh did not take possession of Beth Shean and its villages, or Tanakh and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Iblim and its villages, and the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages. So the Canaanites persisted in living in the land. Came about when Israel became strong that they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but they did not drive them out completely. Ephraim did not drive out Canaanites who were living in Gezer, so the Canaanites lived in Gezer among them. Zebulun did not drive out the inhabitants of Kiphon or the inhabitants of Nahalot, so the Canaanites lived among them and became subject to forced labor. Asher did not drive out the inhabitants of Akko, or the inhabitants of Sidon, or of Ahalab, or of Hatzim, or the Hezbah.
Give you a tough one. I think you've read enough, though. Thank you for that. Tongue twisters. You get the point, though. How come the Canaanites are still there? Huh? They wanted cheap labor. What was their objective? What was the Dan and Lee, what were they supposed to do to the Canaanites? It didn't say destroy them, but they were to drive them out. They did not, and you see that 3 or 4 times. Zebulun did not drive them out. Dan did not drive them out. They were supposed to be driven out of the promised land. The people of Israel thought something better, though. Instead of driving them out, we can make them slaves. What's going to happen? It goes again to what Paul.
God has promised, I will return about this time next year.
Okay, I think you've gotten far enough there, Marty. Thank you. Yeah. The main thing is from who did Jesus receive his flesh from? The Jews. Abraham. That's an honor. You think about, because if Jesus is not man, he cannot save man. And out of all the people in the world, out of the nations in the world, God chooses the nation of Abraham to bring in the plan. That's why when you look at things like Romans chapter 9 about the choice of Esau and Jacob, some people say that, that's a verse that talks about predestination. No, to me, that's a verse that talks about God's plan. That, what do they say in the Old Testament? In the New Testament, the people say we are the God of our God is the Father of Abraham, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Right? That's what they say. So how many promised kids did Abraham have? 1 or 2? He just had 1. He had Isaac. So it's good. You can say Abraham, Isaac. But then Isaac, how many kids does he have? 2. Uh-oh. Which one does God promise to bring Jesus through? Esau or Jacob?
Jacob.
Jacob. So therefore, the people of Israel say, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Esau is out. Not that Esau is predestined to hell. It's just that God made a choice. When Isaac had two, he was going to work through Jacob to bring Jesus. Some will look at Romans chapter 9 and say, see, there's perfect predestination. God is sending Esau to hell. No, it's all about God's plan. God is choosing who, just like he chose Abraham out of the nations. And when Abraham had two grandchildren, he chose at that point in his wisdom to choose Jacob to be the fulfiller of the promise and not Esau. All of a sudden, he started eliminating he limited his choices down to one. So how do you think a confession of a created order will play in political correct world today? You know, we don't have a problem with that, do you? Do we have a problem that the gospel goes to the Jew first? No. I don't have a problem with that. This is my confirmation verse, as a matter of fact, Romans 1:16. It's my verse that my dad said to me as he confirmed me in the Christian and Lutheran faith. I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ as the power of salvation for God's world, first to the Jew and then to the Gentile. I feel that there's things that we should honor, like Paul. The Jews need to be honored because they're the one that God worked the whole plan through. And I'm not envious and jealous that he didn't choose Germany, you know. But some people are that way, right? Some people get upset, you know, that, you know, you got preferences and discrimination. Could the world accuse God of discrimination? Could very much so. Yeah, could very much so. But that's not the way we look at this whole thing, not as Christians. Anything else on that narrative as far as this Canaanite woman that you would like to add or question? Norm.
I think sometimes we sit here and we listen to all this and we all shake our heads and say, yes, yes, yes. And then again, it's like an intellectual knowledge. We walk out of here and we go back and we live our life the same way we've been living it all along.
Yeah.
Nothing changes.
Right.
You know, and just a small example, yesterday, James Byler came by my house and he brought over 6, they call them tote bags or whatever, these big plastic things that were gifts that Joyce Redding had bought before she died, and her kids wanted these to go down to help make the kids' life a little better down in Mexico. So I mean, they're dolls and stuff like that, you know, and so, whatever. But he was wearing Waxahachie right across his chest here.
Yeah.
He must have been working down there someplace, you know. And then I last Sunday I was doing the little thing trying to put the pictures in the right place, you know, for the recording. And I remember seeing the sign up there that, you know, third Saturday, you know, we can help feed the hungry by, you know,
Right.
getting involved with some other people. I just keep thinking of all these different places around here. I saw our friend sitting over here, and I remember when he stood up here in front and, you know, was going to go on your mission trip and whatever, and, you know, we were all excited that one day, but then it's all gone afterwards. It doesn't continue.
Yeah.
You know, and so I wonder how many of us have really followed through with something like that, where we either get involved in Waxahachie, we help feed the hungry, or we, you know, on and on the story can go as to what it may be.
Yeah.
The point is that now that we sit here and we shake our heads in agreement with it,
Yeah.
now we need to put it into life practice.
I guess-
Find some way that I can be involved in that, you know, and you got your talents, everybody does, and so we find the spot where we can still enjoy doing what we're doing, but we're doing something
yeah.
rather than sitting back and.
Right. Just don't read the story. Live the story. Just don't read it. Live the story. One of the things that I struggled with up in Indiana as a circuit visitor, I had the Gary churches in that circuit, and they struggle in inner city. And it was so much easier to do this. I mean, they had a clothing bank, or there was other things that they would need, and I would try to encourage people to say, let's get a caravan, let's go up and do something for that church up there or something like that. What's easier for the Christian to do? Write a check. Annette, you got it. I mean, I'll just, the response you get many times is, how much do you need? That's what I get. You know, no, I don't need money. I need your time. It's so easy. So when people write the check and don't give you time, what are they doing to their conscience? Appeasing their conscience. Oh, yeah, Pastor, you're right. You made me feel guilty. What do you need? Whew, I feel better now.
Well, it is a beginning.
It is. It is a beginning, but what is the problem is when it becomes repetitive.
And nothing else.
And nothing else. And when it becomes repetitive, that's the problem. John?
The thing that comes to mind is that God works, and our work is in response to His work.
Yeah.
And so we need to change our thinking from being guilty to one as being our duty. You know, it's not something that we would do, as I've heard some Christians say, to put more jewels in our crown
Right.
or whatever else. But, and we need to, like I said, just, you know, do away with the word guilty. We already know that we are guilty, and that, but for the grace of God, you know, we deserve nothing, we will not enter into heaven or whatever. So that's the thing that we need to change our perspective.
Yeah. Oh, sure. And you do the best you can, pastors, teachers, everyone that are appointed leaders in the church. That's the objective, is to get people to live the story, just not read it, and to live it in more than just writing a check. Checks are good. They help support things and missions and buy foods and other things. I just find more value, though, in the gift of time, myself. I find more value in the gift of time than the gift of the dollar. Yeah. Donna?
I think of a lot of us too, and I know I've felt it at times. We get to a certain age and we say, oh, well, I've done my bit. And you know, you say, well, let somebody younger handle it for a while. I think older people, they've been here longer, they can offer a lot to anything they put their minds to.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you're in decent health, where you can get somewhere or stuff things together or busy, I don't think you ever get too old.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a good point. Somebody, and I think I've shared this before, somebody once told me up in Indiana, had lunch with me, Dave Bosgraf. He came, I wasn't a member of the church, he's just a good Christian man, sat down with me at Dairy Queen. Of course, you know, Dairy Queen. Sat down with me at Dairy Queen, and he said, hey, Pastor Radel, how you doing? It's good. And he said, we got in a conversation. He said, you know, retirement is not biblical. I thought, man, I'm planning for retirement, and you're telling me it's not biblical, and I'm a pastor. So what do you think he's trying to communicate to me? Retirement is not biblical.
You don't ever stop doing the things.
Yeah, you need to continue to work. You don't have to do the same thing all your life, is what he was saying. But why were we created? One of the purposes of creation was what? To work in the garden. To work in the garden. That's never done until God calls us to the eternal garden. You know, we are to work in the garden. So if you're tired of Sunday school teaching after 20 years, does that mean you're done with everything in Christianity? No, you're not to retire. Find something else. I can understand burnout in a category, but there's other places you can serve. Other places. Just don't throw up your hat and say, I've done my time. That's a frustrating thing for pastors to hear, that you're done. Well, you may be finished there, but you're never finished with living the story. Never finished with living the story. We were created to work the garden. So, yes, I'm going to come to the point where I'm retiring. Does that mean that I'm just going to quit? No, I'm going to find something else to do. You know, I don't know what, but when it comes to that point in time. I just know that if you don't, you see this a lot with people, when you quit working, you just seemingly lose a lot of pizzazz. There's so much that work contributes to your well-being. The one thing you can retire from, hopefully, is stress. Go find something that you enjoy doing and relax and just enjoy your passion.
I have two things. First, if you're a manager and you know that you've got two employees, one is really, really busy and one is not, and you have something you need done, which person is more
Choose the
likely to
busy
get
one.
done?
The busy one.
The busy one, because
Yeah.
they're in a method, they're in like a rhythm. So that's one. And then the other is like this really cool thing that my mom does. I'm sure she learned it from somebody else, to demonstrate to children about putting God first and what God will then do for you so that you can allow time to finish all your other tasks. And I have to remember this because I get it backwards. But it's like you take a big jar and you have 3 styrofoam balls and a pitcher of rice you pre-measure to the amount of the jar. And you ask the class, okay, which should I put in first so that they all fit? And, you wait to get your responses. But what ends up working out is, if you put the rice in first, which represents all the little activities you have in your life to do, then the 3 balls will not fit. But if you put the 3 balls, which represent the Holy Trinity, then the rice fits.
Right.
And it's so true, because if I start my day with prayer and kind of like lay out all the things I'm worried about, and then I do all the things that I'm worried about, it works. But for whatever reason, I never believe it's going to work that way. So I won't do it. And that's like human nature, but it's true. Like, if we try to make time for our treasures, times, and talents to go towards the church first and put that in first and then put everything else, then we'd probably have much more happiness and joy and all the things that God promises. Because, He's the one who's going to make it all work in the end, not us.
Now, that is such, I'm going to agree with you 100%, but I want to put up a little danger on that flag, and that is the danger I confronted my father about. Luther says that there's a order: God, family, vocation. And, as pastors, many times they are going 24/7 in things, and I saw my dad experience the ministry, and I said, that's not the way I'm going to do it. If I go in the ministry, I wasn't even going to go in the ministry because of my father's modeling, but God still called me into it anyway. But I said, I'm not going to do it his way. And I did have the conversation with my father as I was going through seminary. I said, Dad, you've done a good job. So all 4 of your kids are involved in church. I'm going to the ministry. Your daughter is at DCE, and both of your other sons are active in church. He said he did a lot of prayer time. He said he just turned it over to God. It was just a lot of prayer time for my children. I said I was on my knees praying for everyone all the time. I said, well, I appreciate that. It was good, but I just have one thing to say, Dad. I said, you got the order mixed up. What do you mean? I said it was God, family, and vocation. I know in the church, sometimes you can equate vocation with God. And that's what I think happened. I think you equated the institution too much with God, and we suffered because of it. My dad took it. He, like a man, took it right on the chin, but he came back to me, and I didn't know how to respond to this. He said, well, you have to understand, Jared, he said, I've been serving St. John Lutheran Church for 27 years. And for serving a church that long, everyone becomes family. I said, okay, I lost there. Everyone becomes family. But that's the point. You understand that you cannot equate the institution with God. The church is an institution. And sometimes that elder meeting or that council meeting that may get in the way with the family, you have to sit and say, where would God want me rather to be? Do I need to be at that Little League baseball game with my grandchild tonight? Or do I need to be at that council meeting? Sometimes I think people flip it like my father did, and they equate the institution too much with their service to God. God is service through your family too. and to keep that in track, but at the same time, too, don't make your family God either, right? Because then you got it backwards. I've always told people that always try to make that relationship with God, not the institution, but that relationship with God, the primary thing. And if you make that primary thing, will your family be enhanced because they become second, or your family better enhanced because they're primary? Which way is your family better served? When they are in second or when they are in first? When they're in second. It's just the best thing to do. Put the family second. Doesn't that what Jesus say? Anyone who loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. I mean, the scriptures is full of this. That your marriage, your family, your children are going to be better served if you keep that relationship with God. Not your relationship with the institution of the church. Because if you do that, how are your kids going to look at the church? Resentment, negativity. But if they see that your relationship with God is primary, that will carry through and solidify your family even better. That's just my counsel for today. So, my 6 bits or 2 pieces of wisdom. Have you ever heard I'm going to close with this joke. Have you heard the joke about why I'm wearing this collar? Why I'm wearing this collar? Have you heard this one? Apparently, a pastor had said to his kids in the children's sermon, "Do you know why I'm wearing this collar?" And one of the kids said, "Well, I suppose it's because it kills ticks and fleas for up to 30 days. Yeah.
Lecture. He started off with big rocks. So about 10 big rocks, then he worked with pebbles, and then rice, and then sand, and then he goes, okay, this is full of rice, but yeah, and then he reaches under his lumber, pulls out a beer, cracks it, and then he goes,
Thank you. I'll remember that. Let's close with prayer. Before we do, we're going to try a second service as well. We're going to start outside. It was kind of interesting. We started outside today and talked to Carl and talked to Ron this morning. He said that it seemed to work because there was cars in a semi-truck honking support of our Palm Sunday procession from outside today. So that's cool. That's what the point of that starting outside was supposed to do, create a statement to people who weren't in church and maybe couldn't be in church because they're working, but at least they got to celebrate a little bit of Palm Sunday with us today. So, amen to that. So if you're at second service, we're going to start outside again as we did in the first. And if you don't want to walk all the way in, you can join the procession in the narthex. And of course, then you have the other option just to go ahead and sit and wait for the procession to come in. So those are our 3 choices for the second service. And I'd like to try and get as many people outside to make that testimony for the second service as well. Let's close with prayer. Father, we ask, O Lord, for your blessings this morning, and we thank you, O Lord, that you have died for all nations and for all people. And even though you have, you may still yet ask for the created order to be fulfilled, and that's fine because, how can we say that's discrimination? You, O Lord, know everything, and you know what is best. So let the gospel be proclaimed to the Jew first, and then to the Gentile, as Paul proclaims. We know that that's not going to stop the Gentile from hearing the message. For you, O Lord, are God of grace, and you have promised that you wish all men to be saved. Help us, O Lord, to understand, respect your created order, and yet not just read the story, but live the story and proclaim that story in our life by our words and our actions, so that others may become part of this eternal family with you. In the name of Jesus, amen. Sorry about the total interruptions out there, but I don't know what was going on. Feed, me touching buttons, but thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next Sunday, Easter. God bless.